Chapter 10. Dear Holly, thank you for your letter. Vernon was sitting on his bed late at night drafting a letter to his sister. It had been a busy week, and it had been difficult to find time to write her while undisturbed. I am glad to learn everything between you and Dad is okay again. Dad did seem less angry when he returned from dropping Holly and Cousin Harry off at the station. But Vernon figured it was just because with Holly gone there was no point in staying mad. What else should he write? There had been so many things he wanted to ask and say during the summer, but with Holly so fixated on getting back to Hogwarts, there hadn't been the chance. But those were things best said face to face. How is school? My new friend Kenny and I have been busy with lots of homework, but we're managing fine. Vernon hoped Holly realized the importance of the words new friend. It hadn't been easy, but he no longer hung out with Travers and Montague. Last year, the actions of Travers and Montague had gotten Vernon placed on probation for breaking into the headmaster's office, something Vernon hadn't done. With Holly's help, Vernon had gotten his name cleared, but both Dad and Holly made Vernon promise to find some new friends. That had been easier said than done. Travers and Montague were bullies, and the rest of the students considered Vernon one too. Well, admittedly, he probably was. Vernon had decided Kenneth Perkins was the one student who could use a friend. Kenny had refused to lie for Travers and Montague, and had gotten severely beaten as a result. Fearing Travers and Montague's displeasure, none of the other students would go near Kenny. No one but Vernon. Vernon visited Kenny a week after Vernon's name had been cleared. Vernon had apologized for inadvertently getting Kenny beaten. The lie was part of Travers and Montague's plan to clear Vernon's name. Kenneth lay in bed wordlessly and pointedly stared in the opposite direction while Vernon spoke. But Dad had told Vernon making new friends would be hard. He had to be patient and not give up. On the next day, Vernon returned, carrying a stack of books and Kenny's homework and in-class assignments. He offered to write the assignments for Kenny, as Kenny's wrist was in a cast. Kenny again refused to talk, so Vernon sat down next to him and did his own homework in silence. Occasionally, Vernon asked Kenny for help with a problem. Bored in bed, Kenny reluctantly provided assistance. The third day, Vernon returned with more homework assignments and a book for Kenny to read should he not wish to do homework. At that point, Kenny burst out hostilely, his brown eyes flashing. "Why don't you leave me alone? What is it that you want?" Not knowing how to word things otherwise, Vernon was equally blunt. "I want to be friends with you." "You've already got friends," retorted Kenny. "My friends got me placed on probation for something I didn't do," replied Vernon. "Maybe," agreed Kenny angrily, "but they got you off, too." "It only took them 2 months," observed Vernon. "And I didn't know that they were going to use another lie," he confessed. "I was kind of hoping they'd tell the truth." "Fat chance," said Kenny sarcastically. "So I noticed," agreed Vernon. "That's why I'm dropping them." "Why me?" "Why not?" countered Vernon. "You got any other friends?" Kenny winced at that. Vernon had been the only person to visit Kenny since he had landed in the infirmary. "They're probably too scared to visit me because you're here all the time," said Kenny defiantly. "Fat chance, and you know it," said Vernon bluntly. "They're more scared to get on the bad side of Travers and Montague." "And you're not?" "I'm probably already on their bad side for getting them to clear my name," retorted Vernon. "It wasn't exactly their idea." "So," persisted Kenny. "But why me?" Vernon took a deep breath. "Because you're not a rat." "Huh?" Vernon continued in a rush. "You didn't rat out on the people who beat you up, and I didn't rat out on who really broke into the headmaster's office. I figure we have something in common." At that moment, the door opened and Montague sauntered in. He was tall and slender with brown hair and eyes. "Hello, Perkins," he said cheerfully as he shut the door behind him. "Heard you were still laid up, so I brought you something to read." Montague dropped a book casually on the covers in front of Kenny. The book was old and tattered and so worn Vernon could barely read its title, Aristocracy in Great Britain. Kenny left it untouched where it lay without comment. "So this is where you'd gotten off to," Montague said to Vernon. "Travers thought you might be over at the library, but I was sure you had found someplace new to hide out." "Just doing my homework," said Vernon, opening his books. "Well, I think you should find some other place to do your homework," advised Montague, his brown eyes glittering. "You stay here too long, and people might get the wrong idea." "What kind of idea might that be?" "You know, that you're not just doing your charitable duty, but you might actually like the boy." "Something wrong with that?" "Well, yeah," said Montague. "He's not the proper sort one should associate with, if you know what I mean." Vernon did know what Montague meant. Montague had harped on it since Kinney had arrived that fall. Kinney had light brown skin. With that black hair, he didn't look at all English. Worse, he had come from a low-class family attending Smeltings solely because of his high scores and the full academic scholarship he had received. It had been a great educational opportunity for Kinney, but students from the wealthier families made it clear they had no intention of welcoming Kinney into their society. Kinney was the exact opposite of Montague, just the kind of person Holly had advised Vernon to consider for a friend. "Well," began Vernon slowly, "I figure associating with a proper sort has gotten me into trouble twice now, so I thought I would try my luck with the other kind." Montague's features hardened. "You watch what you say," he threatened, "or somebody might just change their stories." "If they do," put in Kinney, speaking up for the first time, "I might just remember who beat me up." Montague swung his eyes from Vernon to Kinney. The look became venomous, and his eyes flashed angrily. "That the way you want things to be, is it? Well, maybe you should reconsider. Wycliffe isn't all that great a deal," Montague added. "He gets low grades and has a questionable family. Wycliffe told everyone that his dad and granddad both attended Smeltings, but I happen to know that no other Wycliffes have attended Smeltings ever. So your new friend is both a liar and a loser. You'd be smarter to keep it to yourself. Take your lumps and be thankful it's not more." With that, Montague wheeled about and left the room, slamming the door behind him. In the silence that followed, Kinney grabbed Montague's book off the bed and tossed it into the trash. "I take it," he began, "that you didn't tell Montague your plans to drop him." No," replied Vernon uncomfortably. Kinney reached out with his left hand for his schoolbooks and randomly opened one. "That true about your dad?" he asked conversationally while flipping the pages. "No," stated Vernon positively. "I've seen Granddad's knobbly stick. If the school has no record of him and Dad attending, there must be a reason." "Travers is going to have a grand time passing that bit of news around," added Kinney calmly while still thumbing the pages. "Yeah," agreed Vernon glumly, "he probably will." "In the meantime," stated Kinney, "do you think you could help me write my assignments?" Sure," replied Vernon, grabbing a notebook and pen. That had all happened last spring. Since that time, Vernon and Kinney had done their best to keep their distance from Travers and Montague. At first, they were more partners than friends, uneasy allies with a common enemy. But with continued association, they had come to trust each other enough to become actual friends. This year, Kinney had welcomed Vernon's arrival with true warmth, which Vernon honestly returned. Sometimes Vernon missed the power he had felt while with Travers and Montague, but not the fear. The fear in the other student's eyes, or that of his own from worrying he might get into trouble. In his free time, Vernon decided to tackle the mystery of why there was no record of Dad attending Smeltings. Travers had made a big deal about it last year. Because of it, the other students, except Kinney, now pointedly ignored Vernon. Not that Vernon really cared. Vernon had only one possible clue about this mystery, and with Kinney's help, Vernon had begun a search. "Did you know Father had a different name when he was younger?" "It was Dudley Dursley." Cousin Harry had called Dad Dudley that first night. Dad told Mum it was an old nickname. But what if it wasn't? How many Dudleys could there be? So Vernon had pored through page after page of old yearbooks looking for the name Dudley. Finally, he found one. The person in the photo was seriously overweight, but the face? Kinney thought the face looked a lot like Vernon. Armed with a new last name, Vernon had continued his search looking for evidence of Granddad. And Grandfather had a different name, too. Guess what? It was Vernon Dursley. The photo of Grandfather showed a stocky boy not much heavier than Vernon. Kinney said Vernon and his grandfather could be twins. That means I'm named after him. How come they never said anything? Do you know why they changed their names? A couple of photos would never convince Travers and Montague the Wycliffe name had once been Dursley, so Vernon couldn't stop Montague from claiming otherwise. But Vernon knew for sure his dad hadn't lied about going to Smeltings. Somehow, Montague's words didn't matter much anymore. I guess that's it for now. Yours truly, Vernon. Vernon wasn't much for letter writing, but he did want to know what Holly thought of the Dursley thing. Ever since Holly started attending that Hogwarts school, she seemed to know much more about Father's family than he did. Are there any other questions about wards before you turn in your assignments? Asked Professor Lovegood. She stood before the class wearing chartreuse robes, matching oversized glasses, and dangling chartreuse-colored carrot stalks for earrings. Yes, Miss Wycliffe? Are wards used only against magical creatures? Holly asked. I mean, they seem rather useful. At her words, the whole class burst into laughter. Rather, the Slytherin half did. Holly looked around, confused. It's only one of the best spells around to keep the riffraff from bothering us, smirked Anthony Richards. Mr. Richards, cautioned Professor Lovegood. Of course, being a mudblood, you wouldn't know, added Scorpius Malfoy, laughing openly. But why do you think Muggles don't know about us? The Slytherins laughed some more. I think you should all turn your papers in now, said Professor Lovegood, ignoring the laughter. In answer to your question, Miss Wycliffe, she continued, this is a defense against the dark arts class, so your text only makes references to wards used against dark magic. As you correctly surmised, there are many other uses for wards. Anti-Muggle wards are used all the time, hissed Mark to Holly while he turned in his parchment. If you want to learn more about Muggle wards, said Shirley Ogg loudly, look up nuisance wards. Shirley wore an emerald green barrette in the design of a viper snake on one side of her head, not that she needed it. Her short bleached blonde hair was so tightly curled against her head it looked almost like a wig. Or pest-repellent wards, added Richards, laughing unkindly. 5 points from Slytherin, said Professor Lovegood serenely, stacking the papers on her desk. And I believe it's time for everyone to go to the practice room now. Wands out. Miss Wycliffe, you may join us today, as practice won't involve dueling. Holly and the other students grabbed their wands and went into the practice room. Don't feel bad about that ward stuff, said Mark to Holly later at lunchtime. We've all got wards. Nobody thinks twice about them. But I guess they would be pretty alien to you as your family doesn't use them. Mine neither, admitted Becky. There are wards everywhere, added Rupert Shunpike, especially in the cities. Yeah, agreed his younger brother Eddie. There's an aversion ward outside the Leaky Cauldron. Muggles pass near and just look the other way so they never see it. Dad told me about it. There's another near the entrance to the Ministry of Magic, too. There are whole wizard communities out there that Muggles know nothing about, contributed Donna Macmillan. Wizards living in wizard neighborhoods generally cast a disillusionment charm over the whole area to help keep Muggles away. Muggles will see an empty lot of run-down vacant buildings, a stand of particularly nasty-looking trees, or maybe some rolling hills with sheep. If they try to come any closer, an aversion ward or a Muggle-repelling charm diverts them, he explained. Lots of private families use anti-Muggle wards, too, added Prefect Ben. That way you can have Muggle neighbors and they never notice a thing. A disillusionment charm creates some sort of an illusion so Muggles see something that is totally not there. Added to an aversion ward or a Muggle-repelling charm, the Muggles will not look too closely, think nothing of it, and keep on going. That seems so cold, said Becky. We're good friends with our neighbors. To think you might have neighbors you don't even know about? What if something happens? Neighbors are supposed to help each other out. A lot of wizards include an emergency bypass release to their anti-Muggle wards, said Prefect Gwyn. What's that? Well, she began, much of magic is the focus or redirection of a lot of mental energy. If a Muggle should focus all his mental energy on the need for help, then it will override the ward and enable him or her to see the wizard house. Isn't that dangerous? Asked Mark. I mean, letting Muggles see your homes, even in a time of need. Not usually, replied Gwyn. When muggles really need help, they aren't thinking too clearly, and if help suddenly appears, they don't take the time to question its source. That's true, confirmed Susan. My aunt was once awakened in the middle of the night by a muggle. It was cold and stormy, and the muggle's transport had slid into a nearby ditch. He needed help getting it out. The muggle wanted to borrow some sort of communication device to call for help. Well, my aunt didn't have any communication device, so she grabbed her wand and followed the muggle out to the vehicle. Using Wingardium Leviosa, she got the transport out of the ditch, made sure it started, and saw the muggle on his way. He never said a word about how that car happened to get out of the ditch on its own. But my aunt saw his face in one of the muggle newspapers later. It seems the man thought an angel had appeared to rescue him. Apparently, when he returned later that week to thank her, he could find no sign of her or her house anywhere. He didn't need help then, you see. So his own mind supplied the explanation for what happened earlier. Our home doesn't have any muggle emergency bypass, snorted Martina Goyle derisively, butting in. If there's a muggle fire next door, let the place burn. A group of Slytherins had been passing by while the Hufflepuffs were talking and decided to add their own comments to the conversation. My parents don't bother with any of that anti-muggle stuff either, boasted Malfoy. Our house is unplottable. It has been for centuries. My ancestors merely compressed the space where our house is, so there's nothing to see. It takes a lot of magic, but it's worth it. Same with us, added Tom Richards proudly. It's not only unplottable, but you can't get to our house at all without knowing exactly where you're going in the first place. And you won't know the location, unless the location is given to you personally by the secret keeper. You might know the general idea, but without the secret keeper giving you its whereabouts, you can't find the house. And there is no way we'd ever reveal our secret to the likes of you, he concluded, directing his remarks at Holly. With a start, Holly suddenly realized that Cousin Harry lived in one of those unplottable homes. Was he that afraid of outside visitors? Was it something left over from the days of Voldemort? Or, given the way that portrait of Mrs. Black seemed to feel about muggles, did it get that way from long before? No matter. Holly was touched. Her cousin trusted her enough to give her the location. Wait a minute. Something was wrong. The Slytherins had never before stopped to join in on a Hufflepuff conversation. Holly had been so busy blocking, listening to their words and thinking about Cousin Harry, that she hadn't been paying attention to the underlying emotions. Were they up to something? Holly looked over at the Slytherins who had continued walking by. Paige Crowley and her classmate Drusilla Plimpton, a prefect, stopped and turned casually to look back at the Hufflepuff table. Drusilla looked nastily smug, and Paige's black eyes glittered with satisfaction. "Stop, everyone," Holly said urgently to the Hufflepuff. "Don't touch any—" But it was too late. Becky, next to her, had just set her glass of milk down, when her head fell forward, landing her face in her food. She started snoring loudly. Eddie, sitting next to Becky, took his hand away from his drink and was watching the muscles underneath the skin bubble and seemed to shrink away, while Susan dropped her glass completely as she started to get longer and longer. "What have you done?" exclaimed Holly to the Slytherins, who now all stood curiously to watch the Hufflepuffs. All but Paige had smiles on their faces. "Research for the potions contest," Paige replied neutrally. As she spoke, Anthony, Scorpius, and Martina grinned even wider. They each held out a small open flask, which they then corked before tucking their respective flasks securely in their pockets. "The far one," explained Paige, referring to the lengthening Susan, "is a growing potion. It's for midgets." "Perhaps we should reduce the recommended dosage on that one," Paige added, observing Susan clinically. Susan had already stretched out and lengthened to twice her normal height, and still continued to grow. "Then we've made a reducing potion. Fat is such a problem these days," continued Paige. "Oh, dear," she said with false concern, noting Eddie now looked something similar to a living skeleton. "I believe it may reduce a bit too much. We shall have to work on that more. That last one," she said, nodding towards Becky, "is a new fast-acting dreamless sleeping draught. I bet you could have used it last year," she added calmly, referring to the many sleepless nights Holly had had after her rescue from the trap in the trophy room last year. Paige may not have known why Holly couldn't sleep, but no one could have missed the walking zombie Holly had become afterwards, before Cousin Harry had helped her find a way to sleep at night again. "How long will it last?" asked Holly in frustration. "I have no idea," replied Paige without concern. "It's still experimental. Do let us know when she wakes and if there are any side effects we should know about." Ben rose up angrily, drawing his wand. "You are all going to be in so much trouble for this." "For what?" asked Tom Richards, moving defensively in front of Paige, drawing his own wand. "We're not supposed to use our wands in the corridors, and we haven't. Nobody said a thing about using potions. The new potions have to be tested somehow. You surely didn't expect us to try them on ourselves." With that, he and the rest of the Slytherins turned and walked casually out of the Great Hall. It took several Hufflepuff students to help Eddie and Susan get to the infirmary, while Holly and Mark managed to drag the sleeping Becky back to the dorms. When they got to the entrance, an angry portrait of a judge in the middle of a trial turned and gruffly demanded, "Password?" "When is the best time to play a mean, practical joke?" said Mark wearily. Even with Holly's help, getting Becky up all those stairs had been rather exhausting. "When?" demanded the judge. "Never." The judge looked madder than ever. "What kind of a password is that?" he demanded. "Reality," groaned Mark. Holly sighed. She really wasn't in a very cheerful mood either, but the judge liked jokes best of all. She dredged her mind to find something quick and easy that the judge hadn't heard before. What has 4 legs and flies?" she asked. "Heard that," replied the judge. "What has 4 wheels and flies?" asked Holly, hastily redoing the joke. "What?" "A garbage truck." At that, the judge began to laugh, along with the rest of the people in the courtroom. "What's a truck?" asked Mark as the painting swung open to let them in. "A Muggle vehicle," replied Holly, thankful the judge never needed to have a joke explained. They moved Becky in and stretched her out on a common room sofa. Sasha greeted the 3 enthusiastically. Holly grabbed some books and sat down near Becky, happy to rest a while. Sasha jumped onto Holly's lap and started purring loudly. Holly stroked her absently while keeping an eye on Becky. She hoped Becky would wake soon, or they would have to take her to the infirmary, too. "And remember, let's get those potion ideas to the developing team as soon as possible," encouraged Gwen. Holly was sitting in the weekly Hufflepuff group meeting. Furious about the way the Slytherins had tested their potions on them, the group had decided the only way to get even was to develop the winning potion. Several ideas had already been submitted, but it was a long way from the idea to the actual potion. Becky had finally woken several hours later that fateful day, but couldn't shake that groggy feeling, so eventually had to visit the infirmary. She still nodded off at odd moments, much to the amusement of any Slytherin that happened to see her. A couple of blasts of Reducto finally got Susan back to her nearly normal size. Even so, all the Slytherins now called her Beanpole. Susan wasn't too happy about that. Why couldn't it be Stick for walking stick insect or something, she complained. Eddie looked much better, but was still very thin. He had to take a pill at every meal until he could get back his normal weight. The pill was dark green with yellow specks throughout. It looked to be the same kind of pill Holly remembered taking after she had nearly died of starvation. Remembering how the flavor of the pill kept changing, Holly wondered what it tasted like for Eddie. When she asked, he promptly replied apple pie and bread pudding at first, but later it tasted like oatmeal and broccoli. Forewarned, none of the other houses let the Slytherins get close enough to conduct additional potions testing. Despite a stern lecture from Professor Slughorn, the Slytherins took delight in the knowledge that they had pulled their stunt off at least once. "And about our potions," continued Gwen, running down her list of things to be discussed. "I'm a bit worried about our progress in making potions. As you all know, we did real well last quarter, placing second in the quantity of potions submitted. Ravenclaw had come in first. And we all agreed to work even harder this quarter to try to beat that number and come in first with potion submissions." Everyone nodded in agreement. "Now," Gwen added, "I know we're all busy with tests and reports and Quidditch, but according to my calculations, we're way behind with our potions. We've submitted less than a third of what we turned in by this time last quarter." The whole group stirred restlessly at this news. "What's going on?" "I'm willing," said Becky, yawning, "but I keep on falling asleep before I can get to the potions mixing room. Everyone laughed sympathetically. Seriously, complained Donna. She was pretty good at making potions and was on the potions creation committee, too. I keep trying to get to the potions mixing room to make potions, and somehow something always comes up. The next thing I know, it's too late to make a potion. A chorus of "yeah" followed that comment. Something must be going on, muttered Ben. We can't all be having the same problem. Holly, any ideas? If anyone could locate deception, it was Holly. I don't know, she replied dejectedly. It's got to be the Slytherins somehow. They've been incredibly happy these last few weeks. I figured it was just because they slipped us their test potions, but it could be something more. I just don't know what they're up to. We should check the other houses, suggested Mark. Maybe they're having problems too. Good idea, agreed Gwen. Holly, you ask your cousins and I'll ask Ravenda. That was the Ravenclaw prefect. Holly nodded in agreement. Cousin Rose was pretty smart. She'd have noticed if something was up, and if anyone knew anything that could help, it would be her. In the meantime, continued Gwen, everyone keep your eyes and ears open if we want to win this contest. Remember, work hard, do your best, and if we help each other, we can do anything. As always, that last part was said together, but unless they could figure out why no one was making potions, Holly doubted they would meet their potions goals this quarter. The morning owl swooped in, dropping mail. Becky gave a cry of delight as she recognized her own owl, Skylar, flying in. Skylar, a common barn owl, didn't stay in the owlry with the other student owls. Instead, she stayed with Becky's parents on their farm. That way they could write her a letter any time they wished. The parents reported their mice and rodent population had gone down dramatically since Skylar's arrival. Skylar dropped a rather thick envelope in front of Becky and then landed on the table, hooting expectantly. Holly fed Skylar a tidbit while Becky pulled out her quill and some paper. Becky scratched a quick note to her parents and then rolled the message up. She attached the message to Skylar's leg and told Skylar to fly home. This way, Becky's parents always had access to an owl. If Becky wanted to send a longer letter, she used one of the school owls. Once Skylar had flown off, Becky turned her attention to the package she had received. Upon opening it, she removed a colorful crayon drawing on a thick piece of paper. "Oh, look!" exclaimed Becky. "Lizzie drew me a picture." "Who's Lizzie?" asked Mark. "Elizabeth, actually," said Becky, handing the drawing to Mark. "She's my sister." "You have a sister?" "Of course," replied Becky, unfolding the accompanying letter. "It's just I've never heard you mention her before." "Well, she's still pretty little. It's not like I do much with her." Mark looked politely at the artwork. It was a piece of very young child's artwork. It had a thick J-shaped blotch of bright red in the middle with some brown circles on top. The circles enclosed faces with simple dots for eyes and upward curved lines for the mouths. On top of the circles were some loopy squiggles in black and brown for hair. "What's it a picture of?" Becky read from the accompanying letter. "Well, according to Mum, it's supposed to be a picture of a Christmas stocking filled with toys." She looked over at the picture. "Definitely a stocking and dolls," she said with satisfaction. "Christmas," moaned Holly, taking a look at the picture. "But December's barely begun. How can she be thinking of Christmas so early?" She passed the art on to Donna, who had reached out a hand, silently asking to take a look. "At that age," mused Donna, "I would guess that's all she's thinking of. Is she in school?" Becky nodded. "Just began this year." "I suppose Muggle teachers tend to use Christmas a lot for their art activities this month." "They do," agreed Holly, remembering her own days at a Muggle school. "I think it's cute," said Lynette, sharing the artwork with Carrie, who nodded in agreement. Carrie passed the paper back to Becky, and an unfamiliar pale hand reached down, snatching it. They looked up and saw the slender figure of Paige standing behind them. Next to Paige stood Tom Richards and Drusilla Plimpton. Drusilla was as tall as Tom, with hazel eyes and dark, thick auburn hair. Like Paige, Drusilla usually ignored the Hufflepuffs, loudly claiming she had better things to do with her time. "I think it looks like a bunch of scribbles any baby could have done," commented Paige critically, her black eyes glittering. She wore a viper green headband today with a matching slinky green dress. "Your sister definitely needs more practice," agreed Drusilla, glancing over Paige's shoulder at the art, clearly unimpressed with Lizzie's efforts. You just have to use your imagination, responded Becky defensively as she took the paper back from Paige. She's only 5. How good were your drawings at that age? When I was 5, I was writing my own spells, not messing around with colored wax scribbles, Paige replied disdainfully. Tom and Drusilla nodded their heads in agreement. What are you doing here? Asked Gwen suspiciously. They all remembered the last time Paige and some Slytherins had paused by their table. To give you this. Paige tossed a small object to Gwen. Gwen instinctively reached out a hand and caught it. The object turned out to be a tiny unlabeled green vial with a lime green cork. I hear Smith still falls asleep a lot. Becky reddened at the comment. Maybe this will help. Gwen looked at the vial suspiciously. An antidote? She asked, looking up at Paige. Perhaps, responded Paige coolly. Why? Paige shrugged. It needs testing, she said, and started walking away. Tom and Drusilla followed. Then Paige added over her shoulder as she walked, Let me know if it works. Gwen looked thoughtfully at the vial. Then she turned to Holly. Holly, what do you think? Holly had instantly unblocked the moment she realized Paige was standing next to them. She was still reeling from the impact of all the surrounding emotions. Mostly, Holly felt the suspicion, worry, and concern of the nearby Hufflepuffs. Tom's familiar anger smoldered as well, along with the cooler, disdainful, less familiar, but still Slytherin-type emotions. Drusilla and Paige? Holly considered what she'd felt. Then she looked up at Gwen. I didn't sense any overt deceit, replied Holly, but I can't be sure, she concluded miserably. She's still up to something. All of the Slytherins are. But whether this is part of that, I just don't know. Gwen sighed. Never mind. We may have lost our edge, but not our brains. She handed the vial to Donna. Why don't you see what you can make of it before we decide what to do? Donna nodded, tucking the vial away for later examination with the potions committee. I have got to learn how to selectively block, muttered Holly disgustedly to herself. She'd been so busy trying to mix potions that she hadn't devoted any time to refining her own abilities. A paper fluttered to the ground next to her. Holly picked it up. Lizzie's art. Holly looked over at Becky. She had slumped over in her seat, fast asleep. Holly folded up the art thoughtfully and then shook Becky awake. Come on, she said to Becky. There's a Quidditch match today. You don't want to miss it. We wanted to get there early to get a good seat, remember? Becky pushed herself up and groggily followed Holly out the great hall.